Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm Christine Van Gyn. Today we're discussing a class action settlement between Tim Hortons and the customers who used the coffee chain's mobile app. In 2020, Financial Post journalist James McLeod broke a story that his Tim Hortons app had been tracking his movements so closely that it knew where he lived, where he worked, and where he vacationed. An analysis of months' worth of data that James had obtained through privacy legislations suggested that the app was even tracking him when it was closed. Government privacy watchdogs investigated the app and concluded that Tim Hortons had violated federal and provincial privacy laws. The Federal Privacy Commissioner called it a mass invasion of privacy. A class action was brought against the company and a settlement was approved. The amount? $9 per customer in the form of free drinks and pastries to affected customers. Is this good enough? What should compensation for privacy breaches be when there is no demonstrated financial loss? Here today to discuss this case is Vass Bednar from McMaster University. Thank you so much for joining me, Vass. Let's talk about this app. What exactly was the app tracking? Can you give us a sense of how invasive it was for people's privacy?
Well, basically, the app was interested. It was kind of snooping on people, following them around, right? So, geolocation data. And as you noted, even when you weren't using the app, which is now a feature that Apple has at least introduced that gives people a little bit more autonomy or puts them in the driver's seat, it wanted to know where people were going. And you can hypothesize about why that might have been interesting. It's also important to remember that, the app was created, this was a pre-pandemic news story. So, right, this broke in early 2020. And I worry that some of it got lost as our worlds got turned upside down. Why would a firm build something like this? Well, it kind of came out of that moment of big data, right? When we were just very excited about what we could do with information. So you could see why a firm would be curious. If I know where my customers are going, if they walk by a Tim Hortons store, do they always go in? What kinds of places do they frequent? Are they health oriented, going to gyms? Are they going to bars? Maybe
Are they
making
going to competitors?
Are they going to competitors and when? And also, does it actually give them information that's valuable to them in terms of developing new products or new donuts or new types of coffee, right?
I actually can see how it would be valuable if they know, hey, my customer just spent 25 minutes in a Starbucks. Let me send them a
Mhm.
coupon for a free Tim's coffee.
Yeah, push when to push them certain enticements through the mobile application. That kind of targeted personalized advertising, absolutely. But there was a big difference from, I believe, what the app purported to track and the transparency, which is you know the bargain that sort of characterizes how we interact digitally, for better or for worse. But it's starting to change, which is really encouraging.
So why do you think people should care if Tim Hortons knows this information? I mean, does it really matter? I told my husband about this, who uses this app religiously. He's used it forever. And he said, hey, if Tim Hortons wants to know when I'm in the bathroom so that they can give me two free coffees tomorrow, let them know. What, how do I tell him that that is really not the way he should be thinking about this?
Well, we're presenting it as a surveillance app, and it was framed as a loyalty app, right? We're giving people rewards for sharing their data. So, in a sense, you could also think that the app is compensating people with discounts or with points or with, getting that free donut because you are a user of the app, which does raise questions about whether people truly have a choice if that becomes the only way to access particular discounts. In terms of the harm, too often, or very often, at least I'll say, we frame privacy harms as highly individualized, right? My privacy, my data. Does Tim's want to know where I am? It does also raise competition questions. The ability of a smaller independent coffee shop or smaller chain. It's not about barriers to the marketplace, but if Tim Hortons knows so much about their customers that they're slurping up in a way that is disingenuous or inappropriate to obtain, that can prevent or create a new stickiness where people may not switch away from their Tim's coffee for a variety of reasons. It's a little bit of a stretch, but I want to make sure we're thinking about what it means for other firms that cannot or do not uh,
Right.
violate individual people's privacy in that
Absolutely.
way, but how they're
We've got to
hired.
go to break. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing revelations that Tim Hortons mobile app was tracking the data of customers well beyond what customers knew was being tracked, including when they were traveling, where they lived, where they worked, and it was storing huge amounts of data. Now, a privacy investigation was launched. Vass, what can you tell us about what that investigation found?
The investigation took about 2 years to confirm everything that James McLeod already warned us about, but formally concluded that yes, Tim Hortons did violate our existing privacy law by not obtaining informed consent from people for the tracking that it was doing. The company had already voluntarily signaled that they would reduce the amount of information they were collecting from people. So, that had sort of been neutralized. But then the story sort of starts to get a little bit comical, right? It's an important case study. It's Canada's case study on surveillance capitalism, rather. We saw a brand survey that came out a couple of days after the privacy, surprisingly, after the privacy commissioner's investigation that said, hey, Tim Hortons is still Canada's #1 trusted brand. So does the fact that they deceived so many Canadians and kind of exploited our trust in their brand with the app, has it had any ramifications for them from a business perspective, or are people switching away from their Tims? It doesn't look like that.
And there also haven't been fines, any regulatory fines levied against the company. Why is that? Is that a failure of our current privacy regime, or why weren't there any fines in this case when the privacy investigation concluded that this was, I think, an egregious breach of privacy?
Yeah, it was another reminder of the overdue reforms that we need for our federal privacy laws, right? Because the law just currently doesn't have the teeth to impose a fine or an administrative monetary penalty. So that, I think, was very disappointing and kind of confusing for Canadians to find, again, that they were in violation of the regulatory structures we have. But what is the consequence? There's no formal consequence, and there doesn't seem to be, again, those informal brand and trust and consumers switching away.
But what there has been is there's been private consequences, although we can discuss whether or not those are going to be effective. There has been a class action filed, and there's been a settlement in that class action for affected customers. I think there's 1.9 million customers that were affected by this privacy breach. It didn't actually cover everyone who was using the app always. It was for a set period of time, but still 1.9 million Canadians. So what, Vass, can you tell us about the status of that class action? What is the settlement?
Well, the settlement, we see a class action kind of supplementing the role of the state, or taking on the role of the state, taking on the role of the regulator, similar to how we saw journalism starting that investigative role, right? Perhaps, arguably. And the settlement is the equivalent of, but it actually literally is, a coffee and a donut from Tim Hortons, which I could totally go for right now, but I think sort of offers a comical ending to a really important case study for Canadians to think and talk about data collection, surveillance, autonomy, competition, loyalty, and of course, the future of privacy legislation.
And is that, a settlement of a pastry, like a donut and a coffee, is that actually any kind of penalty for the company? Because I know they give away millions of coffees and donuts every year. They give them away in the app itself. You can earn a free coffee and a donut. And this actually could potentially be good for the company to have this type of so-called penalty, because it gets people in the door of the company.
You're absolutely right. I mean, let's sort of just hypothesize what would have been superior for the company to do. Say they probably don't want to keep drawing attention to what they've done. They've learned their lesson. But again, were they also operating? Is it fair to say that they were operating in a space that was somewhat ambiguous? Again, Canada wants firms to have digital adoption. We want firms to be innovative. We want firms to be making data driven decisions. Well, this was a way that they sought to do it. And I don't know that I necessarily want to present the developers at Tim Hortons as being inherently nefarious actors. I think they were collecting some information that's also interesting and valuable to the firm. They just weren't doing it in a responsible or an acceptable way. It also doesn't mean that future apps won't track our every move and want to know where we are. But already, thanks to, again, a private actor, thanks to the Apple App Store intervening in its own interests, we can start to tame that data collection ourselves.
We've got to go to break, but we will be right back. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we are discussing a settlement with Tim Hortons, who, it's been revealed, was tracking customers through their mobile app in violation of a number of privacy laws. Now, the class action has a settlement of a coffee and a donut, which, I mean, a lot of people have been critical of. But Vass, what is the challenge of deciding what the penalty should be to compensate customers if there actually is no proof of a financial loss?
This is such a great question. I wish I had more legal training, but maybe we do need to find ways to think about that cost, how the loss of privacy is quantified. Again, in this app, there was a trade-off for that loss of privacy. Points, right? Rewards served by the company. So is that not a proxy, a pseudo proxy at least, for the value of that exchange, right? You're giving your privacy, whether to your knowledge or inadvertently, to this company, and you're sharing your location so that you can get an extra coffee, a bonus muffin, a certain kind of points incentive. So I think we need to see our systems become more creative around how that's quantified, and that the digital economy is just forcing that kind of thinking naturally.
Yeah, do you think that there's an understanding among consumers that even if this data might not have financial value to them, it has huge financial value to the company? This is the example I gave at the beginning of my husband, who said, I don't care if they track me. They can know what I'm doing, know where I vacation. If they're going to give me a free coffee, let them have at it. But that information has huge financial value to the company.
It does. I mean, our information is most valuable in aggregate, typically anonymized. I think you and I would fall in a similar category. You know, young, brainy women with glasses.
Oh, thank you.
You know, like youngish. I always include myself as young. Like, why shouldn't we? Right. So we're, categorized, and then, making particular predictions or assumptions about our consumptive patterns. No, I don't think people always appreciate how data is valuable, because we present data as being valuable when it's monetized, when it is sold. Our data is not as valuable to Tim Hortons if it gives it away to other people. Our data is valuable to Tim Hortons and other firms because they keep it within their ecosystem and extract insights that can help them make more arguably efficient, better business decisions that encourage us to shop more and spend more money when we do so.
For people who are concerned about this, what can they do to protect themselves and protect their data from this type of intrusion?
Well, I guess, people can play around with their settings and certain apps, but we need to bring more of a consumer protection lens to this. And I also think we need to ensure there are alternatives for people. So ways that they can access those benefits, right? Those modest discounts without being forced to use a loyalty app or to pay with their privacy. And I think Canada has kind of a natural precedent with something very boring and older, the Canadian anti-spam legislation, CASL. And I'm not just building a castle in the sky here, but we have a precedent where you can choose not to receive personalized be on a listserv from a firm, but they can't block you from accessing their product or service. So again, can people still get discounts? And this applies to things like grocery discounts. People are more price conscious than ever before. We're in this inflationary period. It can't just be loyalty programs where you have to share tons of information so that you can get a discount on bread or eggs or milk. That's not cool. So I'd love to see us tinker and change from that perspective as well, not just from the privacy lens.
Yeah, I mean, certainly Castle, a lot of viewers might be familiar with this as a requirement. One of the requirements is if you're on a list, you need to be able to unsubscribe, that your data can't just be sold to other parties, that type of legislation. I think it doesn't occur to a lot of people that that could be used in this way. And I think in the absence of reforms to privacy legislation, which so many privacy advocates in Canada have said is badly outdated, very badly outdated. In the absence of reforms, it's great to have some creative thinking about how the existing laws that we have, like Castle, could be used to better protect consumer privacy in instances like that. So it's a really fascinating argument you brought up. We've got to go to commercial break now, but when we come back, I want to touch briefly on this notion of techlash, this backlash to tech that you've written about in the Globe and Mail. We're going to go to break, but we'll be right back. Welcome back to Canadian Justice, where we're discussing the revelations that Tim Hortons had been tracking its customers in violation of privacy laws through the Tim Hortons app, and the class action settlement for those 1.9 million customers in the form of a coffee and a donut. Now, Vass, you have written about something you've called Techlash, a backlash against the companies we trust for how they have used technology, possibly to the detriment of customers. What does Techlash mean exactly, and what does it look like?
Well, I've sort of been wondering whether and if a techlash will spill over to Canada. So the techlash is sort of just us flipping and being a little bit more skeptical, interrogative when it comes to large technology firms or really tech firms of any size.
It's like Gen Z wanting to have flip phones.
Exactly. That's a perfect example. Or, people actually reading more of the terms of service before they get that Tim Hortons app. But why I'm excited we're talking about Tim Hortons is because it's that Canadian case study. And it's easy for us to over-focus on the largest technology companies in the world and sort of forget that over time, familiar firms such as Loblaw, for instance, or the Bay, are actually ripping from big tech's playbook in how they use data and information and exploit us. So if we care about big tech, and if we care about better regulating big tech, and if we're reacting and sort of demanding more accountability, again, from big tech, those largest firms, I think we actually have to care more about the business behaviors that those firms have kind of taught everyone else is the new norm or the new standard. And that's why I just always like to point to Canadian firms instead.
Do you think that maybe we're classifying companies wrong? I mean, no one thinks about Tim Hortons as a technology company. We think about it as a brick and mortar store that sells coffee and pastries. It's a fast place to get a snack when you're on the road. But as they move into technology with apps like the Tim Hortons app, do you think that there needs to be maybe a reclassification of how almost every company now is a tech company?
Well, I think it would be pretty nasty for researchers if we classified everyone
Sorry.
that way. So I get in trouble for saying that, but certainly acknowledging their increasing digitalness and the business practices that are associated with that. Again, if you want to talk about everything that Amazon does, or you're concerned about self-preferencing, well, when you search online with the Bay, they can self-preference their own private label brands in the very same way, which again is why the behavior matters. And maybe we need to start getting away from just considerations related to market size. Actually, back to the Bay is the resurgence of Zellers, like back to Gen Z. I feel like they really like that too. And we're kind of saying, whoa, Zellers is back. This is so cool. Well, who owns Zellers, right? What is happening with Zellers? This is not a tech only example, but it is, owned by the Bay. So it is a tactic to lure more price conscious, budget conscious shoppers back to the Bay umbrella and kind of shop that way. Is that a big tech tactic? Well, it's just similar to all the subsidiaries that Amazon has under its umbrella and how they try to present them to us. So building that awareness and that kind of competency, I think, is useful.
And I love these Canadian examples because I wonder if our regulators are they're always very focused on the conduct of American tech. Do you think that Canadian companies maybe get more of a pass and that there's more scrutiny on American companies?
I worry that we all give Canadian companies a free pass. I've casually kind of asked the question, both formally and informally through my writing and research, whether Shopify is kind of untouchable from a regulatory perspective. A lot of my work is on competition research, and certainly their app store actively promotes app stores that promote deceptive advertising, right? False and misleading advertising, dark patterns. So is that a platform accountability piece, or are we going to hold Shopify to the standard that we've set through existing Canadian competition law that the firm has set informally through their own terms of service, right? Their own company policy.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't have watchdogs that even ask the question, then we can't have the conversation.
Really fascinating stuff. Vass, thanks so much for coming on.
Great to see you.
We've heard today about the settlement in a Tim Hortons class action that implicated privacy rights. What do you think about what the company did, and what do you think of the resolution? You be the judge. I'm Christine, and remember, a freer Canada starts with you.